everyone, and welcome to the second night of Human. It's so great to see so many of you here, and we hope you really enjoyed the hog roast and the live music already. And we've got loads to look forward to this evening, still to come. But first, why don't we introduce ourselves? So, I'm Hugh. I'm a second year at Cuths, studying history some of the time, and I come from Eastbourne, down south.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea. I'm a third year from Hong Kong, studying physics all the time. So as you all know, Human is a week of events where we explore the questions of life, faith and humanity. And we also really love to hear about what you think as well. We just want to say a big thank you to all the volunteers at the back waving for that epic hog roast. It was delicious. Thank you so much. And also a round of applause to the Chronotic Brass for that amazing performance.
If any of you need the loo tonight, then head towards the back of the marquee on the left there and arc your way around to the right. There are a couple of portaloos. And in the unlikely event of a fire, there are 5 fire exits, 1 to the left here, 2 at the back of this marquee, and 2 more through in the cafe area where you came in. 1 on the left, 1 on the right. If we need to evacuate, just follow the steward's instructions.
So hopefully that won't happen tonight, and we'll get to enjoy what we have got planned for tonight. Nat, a student here in Durham, will be interviewing Shane Taylor, and Shane has got a very amazing life story to share with us as an ex-criminal whose life has been completely transformed by Jesus.
And then after that, we'll have a short break. And then Mark, our speaker, will be coming up to explain to us, to help us understand a short story that Jesus told. We're really excited about the chance to open up the Bible and have a look at it. And we'd just love to say you are so welcome, however you're coming into this tent this evening, whether you've never read the Bible before, whether you've got lots of questions about faith, or whether you're actually just quite skeptical. We'd really encourage you just to listen hard to what you're hearing, thinking about it, and also spend time discussing with those around you how you're responding to everything that we're talking about tonight.
Sounds good. So Hugh, a question that we've been asking people a lot this week is that what makes you a human? And a lot of people have been saying to us that their memories make them who they are. So a question for you, Hugh, what is your first memory?
Okay, my first memory is when I was about a 5-year-old in reception. And there was a really cool kid in, there was a really cool kid in our class called Reese who decided to have a house party, and I was petrified by this idea. But Mum convinced me, so she sort of walked me up the driveway to his house, and I remember the door opening and this massive mum in front of me. All the lights were out, and there was a disco ball in the kitchen. And I just bricked it. I burst into tears and just ran out.
You must say, you have a very wild childhood. I mean, disco party at the age of 5, anyone?
Well, what can I say? What about you, Andrea? What was your first memory?
My first memory was my first day of kindergarten. So Mum was really excited that I'm finally going to school, but I wasn't feeling that great and I was crying my eyes out. But rather than, like a normal mum would do, comforting me, my mum got me standing there and took a photo of me. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, poor little girl.
It's pretty traumatic starts for both of us then. Right, let's welcome up Nat, who will be interviewing Shane tonight. Nat, come up onto the stage.
Hi, Nat.
Hello.
So I wanted to ask you about your first memory, but you said it was too embarrassing to share. So what is your second earliest memory, Nat?
My second earliest memory, it's actually just quite sad as well. It was in reception and I got dropped off by my dad and I was the only one in the playground and I looked around and I just started crying and the headmaster found me and took me under his wing. It's just a bit sad, yeah.
That's miserable. I mean, does anyone here have a happy childhood? Anyone? Over to you, Nat. Thank you so much.
Sweet, thank you. Human is about sharing stories of life, faith, and humanity. And each evening in this venue, we're going to be interviewing different individuals, and they're going to be sharing parts of their story. And after that, we are going to hear a story that Jesus told. And tonight, I'm super, super excited to invite a guy called Shane Taylor up. Shane grew up in County Durham, and he has spent a lot of his life in and out of prison. And he's going to be sharing part of his story with us. So let's give a warm welcome to Shane. Take a seat, Shane. So good to see you. So you are Northeast born and bred. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
No.
No.
What, you want me to start now?
Yeah, you're married, you've got 5 kids. Is that right? You live in Middlesbrough?
Yeah, I'm married, I've got 5 kids. I live in Middlesbrough, she just told you.
There we go, we smashed it. But you were brought up in this area. You're used to County Durham.
County Durham, Peterlee, yeah.
And you had quite a vibrant childhood. You were sort of in and out of crime at quite a young age. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, when I was young, I used to get, at school, I had carrot ginger hair. I've still got ginger hair, obviously, it hasn't changed, but it was carrot ginger when I was a kid, and I used to get picked on and bullied because of it, and I didn't realise at the time, but it had a big effect on my life. Because I was getting picked on and bullied all the time, I got the personality of never feeling like I fitted in with anybody. I felt like I was always the odd one out. Even in my family, I felt like I was the odd one out and didn't fit in. I wasn't loved. And my life just went on like that, getting bullied and picked on. But then I started to get in with the wrong crowd, really, with just young kids. And I mean, like, I can't even remember how young I was when I started doing stuff. I just remember that all my life, when I was really young, I used to go around burgling houses and pinching cars just to fit in with the lads and stuff, and I was just become what the police call at the time an opportunist thief. And so we would just go out with no intention of stealing certain things. We would just go out and anything we could come across, we would steal it. So if we could burgle a shop on that day, we'd burgle a shop. If we saw someone's front door open, we'd creep in, take the handbags and stuff. If there was a car with the keys left in, we'd just jump in and drive off. And that's what I did in my young life, really, as a kid.
And did you have any motive for this? Did you have anyone you looked up to who did something similar?
No, it was just fun. Enjoyed it. No, I have to be truthful. At the time, not now, obviously, but at the time, I absolutely loved it. It was great. It was fun. Adrenaline rush. Nothing else to do in the estate where I lived. And everybody around me did that. And I just remember why I liked pinching cars is I remember when I was really, really young, in the early 90s in Peterlee in County Durham, it was big for car chases, people stealing cars. And I remember a helicopter being out, and I was at the shops, and I remember all the older lads who I looked up to were all hanging out the windows, waving and that, with about 50 police cars behind them. Mm-hmm. And all the estate came out, and they were all egging them on. And I just remember thinking, oh yeah, I want to do that. And that just sent me off down that route. And the money as well.
And what did your family think about this? You're living at home at this point, you're a young child?
They just thought, obviously they tried everything they could to help me, but I loved doing what I was doing, and I loved being with my mates, so I just didn't listen to my parents. Got told off, got everything you could get, and I just didn't listen.
Yeah. And if at that age, that young age, I had asked you, or someone had asked you, who is Jesus to you, what would you have said to them?
I don't know. Who's he?
Fair enough. Good answer. And at about 13 or 14-ish, you continued to do more crimes, and you were given something called Section 53. Can you explain to us a little bit what that is? Yeah,
I was Section 53. I was Section 53. It's when you're really underage, and you can only get a certain sentence. So, for example, say you can only get 2 years if you were 14, 15. That you could have a 2-year sentence. But it's a Section 53 year. It means they can give you above the legal sentence they could normally give you. And when I was about 14, 15, I got Section 53 and I got sentenced to a 3-year sentence at a young age, and ended up in a Cliff Secure unit when I was a kid.
And you, when we were chatting earlier, you said, was it you're the first person?
I was the first person in the northeast of England to get Section 53'd. And the judge said it was to make an example, because all of my friends around me were all criminals and were all going through the same courts together all the time. And so he did it to me thinking it would make an example of everybody else, but they just got worse anyway, so it didn't matter.
So about 13 or 14 years old, you were named as one of the most dangerous young offenders?
No. At that time, I was just a rogue. I was just a little thief who would just burgle houses, pinch cars. I wasn't really known as being a psychopath or whatever you want to call it. I was just a young criminal, just stealing and doing stuff at that time, and then going in and out of prison and doing stuff. And it was when I got a little bit older when I started going a bit loopy.
So you carried on, you're doing lots of crimes, sort of like, just is it small crime, like burglary, theft,
everything.
that sort of thing?
Anything and everything.
Anything you can do.
Yeah.
And at about 18 or 19, you started to commit some more serious crimes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I started to, I didn't count on mental health. I started to suffer with mental health, and so my mindset went down the route of wanting respect and wanting people to fear me. I don't think I ever had respect, but I wanted people to fear me. And so I started walking around. There was a time when I started fighting back as well, and I loved the attention when I was fighting back with people, and that just sent me down that route of no one's going to mug me off again. Do you know what I mean by mug me off? Is no one's going to make an idiot out of me ever again. And so I just went down that route of pure violence, drugs, crime, and wanted a big rep for myself, and just went round doing crazy stuff. I went to Hartlepool town centre and bumped into another local handy lad at the time. And he pulled out, this is in the middle of Hartlepool town centre, he pulled out a hammer, and I pulled out a 9-inch kitchen blade, and he ran up to me, hit me with a hammer, and as he hit me, I stabbed him 4 inches through the head. And I was on the run for attempted murder. While I was on the run for attempted murder, I like to say I couldn't get a job, but I wouldn't have had a clue how to get a job at that time, so I used to sign on. But I couldn't sign on because the police would know that I'm going to sign on and they'd be there waiting for me. And so I did what you call tax. It's where you go to a local drug dealer and take large sums of money or large sums of drugs off them. And that kept me going while I was on the run. While I was on the run for that attempted murder, I went to Peterlee in County Durham. And that's my local area. But some people had told a lie to this local hard lad to get him involved in a situation over somebody getting kidnapped. And I got put on remand for it and got out of prison. And when I got out of prison, I was driving up the street on a motorbike, and the family were on the front to shout they were going to get me. So I jumped off the bike with a knife, chased them all. But they told this lad a lie to get him involved. And I used to sell ecstasy tablets at the time. And I went in the club. I remember going in the club, and it was one of them clubs half a use would walk in, have an heart attack, and run back out, because it's like a criminal where all the local drug dealers go and all the criminals go there, you know. And if you're not known, the club would probably go silent and they'll all look at you. And I just remember walking in, and there was this lad who had been told this lie to get involved. And I remember him. I went in to give some ecstasy tablets to my friend, because I couldn't get rid of them, and I was just going to give him them. So I give him the E, and this lad come over and pulled me up, and he sat me down on the side of the table, and everybody by now knows me as being an absolute nutter, and my life was all about a reputation at the time. And I just remember, going to explain myself to him when he got involved, and then I thought, wait there, man, I'm not explaining myself to him. But then I remember looking to the side, and everyone in the club was silent. And I remember thinking to myself, wait there a minute, this lad's just pulled me up. If I don't do anything, it's going to look like I've been pulled up and I've backed down. And so I decided to make an example of him. So everyone in that club would go out and tell people what happens when you pull me up. And so he said something to me at the wrong time while I'm thinking this. He said, you want to mess about with the big boys? And something snapped. And I put my face to his face and I said, no. I said, you've just messed about with the big boys. I said, get outside, I'm going to kill you. And he didn't believe me. To cut all that short, he come out, and I pulled out a 9-inch kitchen blade. And as he come out the door, I turned round and I stuck him straight through his body. He slumped to the floor. 2 of his friends jumped off the step, pulled out knives, and it was like a standoff till someone shouted police, and then everybody ran. I'm now on the run for 2 attempted murders. I had kidnapping charges and stuff. And just loads of other crazy things. And, that's it, really.
And what did you feel about this stuff? Like, did you have any sense of...
You know, I don't
remorse?
feel this now, but I have to be truthful. I loved it. See, life to me at the time was all about a reputation, and so getting that revenge and passing that message out to people. And I suffered with mental health, so actually I was just saying to someone before, I was like, I actually used to get adrenaline rush when I did it. And I used to, and you know, I have to be truthful, at the time I wished he'd have died, because that was my goal. My goal was to kill him. I was mentally ill. I didn't care if I got lifed off. I just wanted this reputation that everybody feared me and everybody knew what happened when they came across me and crossed me. And that was it. You're willing to go around stabbing people and trying to kill them. It puts a lot of fear in people, even in the criminal world. They think you're nuts. So everybody just avoids you. And that's what I wanted. And so I liked it.
So it's all about this reputation, all about building fear. Did you have friends? Like, were there people around you who you trusted?
I think it's a hard one. In the criminal world, you have people you trust. I think there was one or two people in my whole life who we built that relationship up where you've got each other's back. You'll die with each other. Like literally, we've been in situations where there'd be 9 lads stood over there, and we'd be on our own, and we'd just look at each other and go, "You're up for it? Yeah, let's go." And we'd just run at them and just get into a fight. You know, you've got each other's back, and you have that. But it's very rare. Not everybody. There was only 1 or 2 people who I was like that with. Everybody else, I just didn't trust, and they shouldn't have trusted me either.
And this is about 18 or 19, is that right?
Something like that, yeah.
And what was like your most for committing these crimes? Was it specific people you were targeting, or did you just...
Just anybody who I felt disrespected me. I didn't care. If you were walking down the street and you bumped into me and shouted at me or something, I'd get you. I couldn't, because I was mentally ill. I couldn't let things go. You know, if somebody did that to you, you know, by tomorrow you'll have forgot about it. But for me, I would go home and it would linger in my head. And then if I was walking down the street a couple of days after and somebody laughed, I had a bit of a paranoid nature. So I would be thinking, they're laughing because he's mugged me off and I never done anything. And then the longer I left it, the worse it was going to be for the person. You know, that poor sod, you know, he'd have totally forgot about it. He'd be sat on his settee. I'd turn up a month after, knock, 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 knock. Remember me? I was like, no. He was like, you bumped into us. You know what I mean? And that's how bad I was. I just couldn't let things go.
And do you think you'd have thought at that age that would have always been your future? That was what you sort of saw?
It's my life, yeah. I couldn't imagine being where I am now. I know that.
And so this is 18 and 19, and you get charged with these things, and you get something called a Section 18. Can you tell us a bit what that is?
I got charged for 2 attempted murders. But in how the courts work is you plea bargain. You know, you go not guilty, and your prosecutors and your barristers, they go through the process of plea bargain. And then you've got murder, attempted murder, Section 18, Section 20, and then it goes down. And so I plea bargained my 2 attempted murders. I got one knocked down to Section 18 and the other one knocked down to Section 20. And I got a 4-year prison sentence for that.
Where did you go to prison?
I ended up started off in Northallerton Prison and just went absolutely crazy in there. I went into prison with a mentality, if I don't care if I get lifed off, no one's going to mug me off. And I just went in there in my own head to take over.
And your family at this point, were you just obviously, until you went into prison at this point, you're living at home. What did they think about this?
I don't know. I guess my mum and that, they loved me. They didn't agree with what I was doing. Well, actually, I'm lying. They were in crime themselves in some other ways. Not necessarily the violence, but my mum and that just thought I was nuts as well.
And so you're in prison, you get moved around a lot, and you start committing crimes in prison as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I was anti-authority. At the time, I was about 19 stone. I was big. I loved my gym. And the prison officer wouldn't let me go to the gym. And so I plotted to get him. Went out in association with a big, massive glass coffee jar. I went up to 2 inmates who were playing pool. An inmate who was playing pool. And 2 inmates to go and talk to the prison officer so that when it kicked off, they would stand in front of the gate so he couldn't get out off the wing. So they went over and started talking to him, and the other lad started chucking the pool balls. And when they chucked the pool balls at the prison officer, he jumped up, drew his bat on, pressed the riot bell, and ran at the lad who was chucking the pool balls. And I then smashed the bottom of the coffee jar and ran up and stabbed the prison officer 3 times. And then when another prison officer come, I was alleged to have stabbed him as well. This puts you on, you become I was a dangerous prisoner anyway beforehand, but this just upgraded everything, and so I became a very, very, very dangerous prisoner, and got isolated off, got what they call segregation. And they segregated me off, and while I was segregated off, I just waged my own little war against the system, fought the prison system constantly. Every time my cell door opened, I would fight. And this led to me being put on what they call CSC, and it's a close supervision circuit. And just to give you an understanding of what this is a maximum security prison is designed for some of the most dangerous prisoners in the country. So you've got terrorists, mass murderers, serial killers, you name it, they're in there. And they will just go on a normal wing. When you're on CSC, you're isolated off from them because you're too dangerous, and then you're isolated off from the segregation. There's no physical contact. If your cell door gets opened, there's 6 to 7 prison officers with riot gear. If they feed you through a hatch. So there's like a box they fit onto the bottom of the door. They'll unlock one side, put your food in, lock it, and then unlock the other side. And still, when my door opened, I would try and fight because I just wasn't in the right frame of mind.
Did you enjoy that?
Don't know, I just did it. Just mentally ill. I don't know if I enjoyed it at that time. Just a lot of anger. So I want to be careful because it's not for me to put the system down, but things happen in prison, brutality, stuff like that. So just builds on your anger, and then the more times things happen, the more anger you create. No excuse. I did what I did. But the more things happen, the more angry you're against the system you get, and it just feeds, and you just hate each other, and it just goes on like that. So a lot of it was pure hatred and anger. And at the time, if I'd have got hold of one of them and got through that riot gear, I'd have killed them.
So you're in a maximum security prison, you got segregation, and then you're segregated from those people.
Yep.
You've got 6 or 7 people fully armed just to open your door. And this gets you in the top 6 most dangerous men in the prison system, is that right?
And the Home Office have I didn't know this. I found this out by Nicky Gumbel, actually. But the Home Office have every year they sit on a board at the Home Office, and they assess the top 10 most dangerous prisoners in the country, and they assess them every year, and they'll talk about what they're going to do. And I was on that top list. I don't know if I was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I know I was on the top 6 most dangerous prisoners in the country at the time.
What sort of person would you say you were at that point? I
just thought it was normal. No, I knew there was some problems, obviously, but but you got to remember it's just like me being put in your life and getting brought up in the way you've been brought up. I can never understand that until I go through it, and it's what it's like for me. It's all I knew. I'd been in crime from a child as young as I could even remember. Everyone around me were criminals, even in my family, and so I grew up, and it's all I knew. I was in prison. I was sentenced in prison by the age while you're secure unit in prison by the age of 14, 15-year-old. And then from then on, it was in and out of prison. That's all I ever knew. So it was just like normal life to me, prison. So I just thought it was normal.
And if I'd asked you at this point, who is Jesus to you, what would you have said?
Beat you up. No, I'm only joking. No, I'd have probably got a bit aggressive because I was anti-God, anti-Christ, anti-all this. It was rubbish to me. Didn't believe in no God, didn't believe in anything like that. And so if you'd have come to me then and said, do you believe in God or Jesus or something, I'd have probably got frustrated and told you, get away, get out my sight. What's he done for me? If there's a God, why is my life like this? That's probably what I would have said.
And soon after, you end up at something called an Alpha course. Can you tell us what that is and how you ended up there?
Well, to me, as with me being a Christian now, when I look back, I can only put it down to God for the, we say coincidences, but on the heart, I'd never, if you've heard of an Alpha course, right up until me walking in the actual room, I had never, ever heard of an Alpha course and didn't even know it existed. I went to a maximum security prison in Long Lartin, Worcestershire, and when I was there, I went in, and I was in a few weeks, and then my door opened, and the officer said, go to education. So how it works, they've got movements in the prison, just so you know how it works, and you'll understand I shouldn't have been sent on it. They've got what you call movements, and so they'll send you to education, gym, visits, whatever's on, you'll go to there. And when you get to the other end, there's some prison officers at the gates with a board, and it's got the names on of everybody who should be at education. And if your name's not on the list, they will send you back to the wing, and you'll have to get banged back up until they call you again. And so they opened my door and said, go to education. So I get to the other end, and the prison officer, he said, your name's not on the list, you're going to have to go back to the wing. And I made a bit of a fuss. I was like, I've come all the way down here. And after a while, the officer stepped back, and he went, go to the chaplaincy down there. He seemed a bit annoyed. And he sent me to the chaplaincy. And I remember walking in the chaplaincy room. I remember seeing a circle of people. And I remember seeing this posh person on the telly. Hello, obviously I know that to be Nikki now, but I didn't know who it was at the time. And I just remember sitting down in this circle, and I remember thinking, oh no, it's a Christian thing. And I remember thinking in my head, as soon as this video stops, I'm up and I'm out. And as soon as the video stopped, this little woman sat forward. She went, what's your name? I give you my name. She said, your name's not on the list. You shouldn't be here. I said, oh, well, I'll go. And as I was doing that, one of the lads, he whispered to me, he went, you get free chocolate gatos and biscuits and that. I went, and this is I said, oh, miss, can you put my name down, please? And it was the only reason I was going on this Alpha was for the chocolate biscuits, the coffee, and it wasn't freeze-dried. It was proper Nescafe as well. and the gatos, and obviously, God knows I love gatos, so that kept me on. And I just went on there, and I'll carry on. Yeah. I went on there, and my view of Christianity and my way of thinking about God was this. When I went on that Alpha, it's a big conspiracy. Christianity is a big conspiracy by the government to keep people under control. That's what I used to believe. If you can convince people there's a God and these rules that can comply to, and then everyone will comply to them. And that's what I used to think. And the other thing is I had a religious side of Christianity. I'd always heard, I'd never heard the message when I went on the Alpha of what I heard. I always saw this religious thing where there was this big list of tasks you had to do. And when you did them tasks, then you're a good person, then you're a good Christian. And actually, when I was on this Alpha, I was hearing a totally different message to what actually is in the Bible. And that opened my, it started changing. But I just remember, and I believed in science, so that prevented me from believing as well, because I believed in the Big Bang Theory and all that stuff. And so it just totally prevented me from any belief in God whatsoever.
And can you explain what an Alpha course is for those who don't know?
No, I'm only joking. But Alpha course is what I know now is the basics of Christianity, and basically they respect your opinion. You're entitled to have any of, normally you can, Christians are like, no, I don't mean why I'm like this anyway. But you can get really heated, can't you? You're talking about God, and you've got this Christian, and God's real. By the end of it, they're shouting at you, you better believe. You know what I mean? You start off all humble, don't you? Oh, Jesus is real. Yeah, you just believe in him. And by the end of it, we're so heated up, you're in a heated argument. But on the Alpha, no matter what you said, it was I remember saying to them, oh, you're all a bunch of idiots. Look at the state, you're weirdos. I'd be like, oh, that's great. That's your opinion. And I remember thinking, because I was trying to goad them into arguments. I wanted arguments with them. I wanted them to argue with me. And they were just like, oh, no, that's what they do. Oh, Christianity, the state he is, look, he is, and they'd be like, oh, that's great. That's your, and that's what they were doing. And that, which I'd never had before. Because like I say, I've always come across Christianity. And, I guess they don't mean it, but it's because of passion, I guess, can get heated. But it was just the basics of Christianity, and you could ask any question. You do a little tiny talk on a subject, and you stick to that subject, and you just give your opinion. And I started hearing things I'd never heard before, like God died for sinners. That we're all sinners, that there's no one in this world. It says in the Bible, no one's righteous, not one. We all fall short of the glory of God. And even as yourselves, I know you haven't had a criminal life, but I'm telling you now, I bet you're half you sat there and you've got things that you wouldn't like mommy and daddy to know. That's a fact. And you all sat there going, oh, yeah, definitely. But, so we've all got that sinful nature in a sense. Not as bad as me, but yeah, anyway, go on. Yeah, Alpha's great.
And what you work for Alpha now, right? And what happened to you in one of those weeks that changed things?
Well, like I say, I thought they were mad anyway. But you have this big build-up to this Holy Spirit Day. You know what I mean? They were telling us people have experiences all over the world and people are crying. And so I went there with this expectation, something's going to happen. So I goes in there, people are crying and people having these experiences. I'm sat there like, well, now it's happening to me. So it even made me think even more, it's all rubbish, and I got a little bit resentful of what was going on. And I remember making a cup of coffee, Nescafe, and this pastor come to the side of me, and he said this to me, he said, I've never done this in all the years I've worked here, but God has just told me to tell you to come here this afternoon all by yourself. And again, it was just like in my own motive, get out my cell, get some biscuits, coffee and stuff. That was my motive. So the education, they come, they bang us up for a couple of hours and then they release us again. He put my name down to go back to chaplaincy. I went back to the chaplaincy, I had to look for him, found him. And he got 2 chairs, put 2 chairs in front of us. And he got the Bible out and he said some verses out the Bible. One of them I clearly remember was, no one's righteous, not one. We all fall short of the glory of God. And the other one was about Jesus dying on the cross. And he gave me a little explanation of what it meant. And he said, pray. Oh, yeah. He said to me, pray. And I just remember asking, well, what do you say? What do you mean, pray? What do I do? And he said, from your heart, pray. And I just remember finding myself saying, wait there.
Take your time.
I just remember finding myself saying, look at God, if you're real, come into my life. I hate who I am. I don't know why I'm saying this, by the way. I hate who I am. I hate who I've become. Please, if you're real, just do something. Show me you're real. I said other stuff, and I can't remember what I said. But I just remember sitting back. I'd finished praying. I'd stopped praying. And I remember sitting back, and we're in a normal conversation. And when I'm talking away to him, I'm talking away, and I start to feel an energy, bubbly feeling in my stomach. And it start to raise up a bit, And as I'm talking, I'm thinking, what on earth is this? What's going on here? And it made me stop. It got up a bit more to near my chest, and I started to feel myself going to cry. And I stopped talking. And the more I was trying to hold that feeling in, the more it was getting stronger and stronger. And then I just broke out into uncontrollable tears. And I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed. And I knew from that moment on God was real. I knew. It was almost like I've lived all this life, all my life. And all of a sudden, I just knew, something opened up in my head. And I just knew. I knew it was God. And they must have thought I was even more mad. Listen, this is funny, actually. But after this, I ran on the wing with the Bible. And the prison officers know I'm mad anyway, and they're always watching me. So they're standing groups in top security prisons. They're not like normal prisons, on movements in case they get attacked. They like to be together in groups. And I ran up to them, and I've jumped in front of them. And I went, it's real. And they've all sort of jumped back, thought something was going to happen. I was going, it's real. It's really real. It's real. And one of the officers went, what's real? I went, Jesus Christ, he's real. They all split up and walked off. I remember running in my mate's cell. He was eating his dinner. And I ran in. I was going, I've just been crying. Jesus is coming into my life. He's real. He's real. He jumped up and chucked me out. And, I just became an absolute... I got nicknamed Dot off EastEnders. And, because she always quotes scripture. And I used to be like, I didn't even know the Bible at the time, but I just remember running about and someone would say something and I'd be going, under paragraph 53. Like, thou shalt not, and all this stuff. I was absolutely nuts when I first became a Christian. But all I knew is I knew God was real, and it changed my behaviour, changed like literally overnight, to the point of where the number one prison governor arranged a meeting, and I went in, and there was a big long table. Number one governor was at the other end. There was probation, social services, imams, rabbis, and all different people all sat around the table. And they must have all been planning to ask me a question. But the number one governor said to me, do you think you'll go back to prison? And for about 15, 20 minutes, I was preaching Jesus to him. And at the end, he went around and he went, anyone have any more questions? Or I went, no, you're all right, and put the head down. In my life, I went from being segregated off, being one of the most dangerous prisoners in the country, to overnight, I ended up being enhanced. And in prison, it's new all this though, but in prison, they've got when you go into prison, you go in on standard. So you'll go in as standard. If you misbehave, you lose your privilege, you'll go on basic. And if you're really well behaved, you get enhanced. Within about a month, I was enhanced. I ended up working on the prison chaplaincy, which is a privileged job. And my life I've never said this actually, but I remember being in the chaplaincy. And this woman come up to us in a suit. And the governors were my sworn enemy at one stage. And even when I used to go on an adjudication, they'd all have the riot gear on, even the governors. And I'd still try and get them. And I just remember talking to this woman at the side of me. And she was like, I've heard you've become a Christian, a born-again Christian. And I was like, oh, yeah, bro, preaching for 10 minutes. And then I went, who are you then, probation? She went, oh, no, I'm the number one governor. And we were stood there, me and the number one governor, who were sworn enemies at one stage, talking about God. That was like crazy. Yeah. Shall I stop or carry on?
No, it's good. Obviously, for some people, hearing that immediate transformation, it's probably quite hard to understand. How do you explain that? Do you understand how it happened so suddenly?
How can I? How can I answer that question? Like, I was where if you don't believe in God, I was in exactly the same place. How can I explain it? All I know is 1 minute I didn't believe. I thought Christians were nuts. The next minute I'm having such an experience that brings me to tears and I'm a full-blown believer. I'll die for Jesus Christ. I'll die. I know people say, whatever. I'm telling you now, someone put a gun to my head and said, say Jesus isn't real or I'll blow your head off. I'd have to say he is, because I know it's true. I know what happened to me in that prison. I know it happened. I know God's real. So I would rather die to say that he's not real, because then I would be lying when I know what happened to me. Does that make? I don't hope that makes sense. But I'm so convinced of what happened to me in that prison. I know it's the truth. I just know.
And what did your friends, your family, your prison mates think of this?
Oh, they just think I'm mad. But in a different way. No. I've seen lots of people change their lives around because of the testimony even. My mum says, I don't believe in God, but I thank him anyway because he's changed your life. My mates just think I'm nuts and mock me. They just think it's funny. But isn't this actually, when I first got out of prison 11 years ago, 3 of my main mates laughed at me when I got out. And I said, I'll get you to church one day or you'll start looking into God. And they all laughed and mocked me. They're actually all in prison now when I'm running an alpha course in prison. And guess who turned up on the alpha course? Asking about God. All 3 of them lads. So that's a bit of a turnaround.
And then you came out of prison because your sentence finished, is that right?
I hope so, I wouldn't be here.
Good.
Sorry.
But you were due to finish anyway, and you came out.
Yeah, I got out, yeah.
And we've just got a couple of minutes left, but obviously being a Christian is about a journey. We're all still being transformed. What does that look like for you today to still be on that journey?
I'm married. I've got 5 beautiful kids who I love and adore, who have got, if I had my kids back in the day, They'd have been brought up in the wrong way. I'd have brought them up in violence. When the lads got a bit older, I'd have shoved them with steroids. I'd have took them all into UFC fighting and drummed in the head. They've got to be tough. You've got to be hard. You know, what does that do to a person? And as a father now, they've got a father who brings them up right. They have Bible studies. They go to church every Sunday. They love God. And my oldest daughter got baptised not long ago. God's done everything for me. I now go in the same prison, the very prison where I stabbed the 2 prison officers up, with the first prison to have me in. I'm now going in every week doing alpha courses in there. And one of the prison officers who I stabbed came into the room, and I got up and I held my hand out, and I just said, "Look, I'm sorry for what I've done. Will you forgive me?" And he held his hand out. He's not a Christian. I put "yet" in brackets at the end. I said, "Will you forgive me?" And he shook my hand and he said, "I'll forgive you," which was massive for me. And God's just doing things. I've seen so many things. It's unbelievable. I could go on and on and on, trust me, but she said, "I've only got a couple of minutes."
I'll finish with this question. Who is Jesus to you today?
He's my life. Look, I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't be out. I wouldn't have a wife and 5 kids. I wouldn't be working for the Alpha. I would be rather in prison for the rest of my life because I killed somebody, or dead. And I'd have been out a while now, so I'd probably be dead, or I'd be doing life in prison. And now I'm going around telling people this story, and I tell them for this reason. I know what happened to me in that prison. You can believe it or not, but one day we're going to die, and it's your choice what you choose. But I'm telling you now, what I've told you today happened to me, and it's the truth. I promise you. I'm not here to lie. In fact, this goes against my lifestyle. I get mocked for it. Why would I do that? Lost half of my friends through it. Lost half of my family through it. I've had death threats through it. Why would I do that? Did I just wake up one morning, "Ooh, I'm going to be a Jesus freak tomorrow"? Actually, we're not freaks when we believe in Jesus, sorry. But I just, you know, you get my point? I come here to do this because I know what happened to me. And I really, really pray and hope in my heart that at least one person here, it plants a little seed there to get them on that little route to start searching about this God. Because when God comes into your life, you know for 100% fact that he's real, and it'll change your life. It'll totally, totally transform your life. That's it, really.
Thank you so much, Shane. That is incredible. Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks so much, Nat, and thanks, Shane, for sharing with us. That was great. We're going to have a few minutes now just to have a bit of a breather. There's a little bit more hog roast that's going to be brought round to us, but just a few minutes to have a breather and maybe chat about what we found interesting that Shane was sharing with us. So see you in a few minutes.
Thank you so much. So we'll now look at a story that Jesus told 2,000 years ago. Luke wrote about it based on eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life. You will find this little light blue color little booklet around you on your chairs, on your table. It says Luke on the cover. And Hugh will be reading from that little booklet.
Great, yeah. Shall I take that back? Oui. Brilliant. So yeah, in your copies of Luke's Gospel, do grab one. It should be either on your tables or on your seats. We're in page 40, and we're going to be reading a story Jesus told called The Parable of the Lost Son, and starting from the little number 11 near the top of the page, page 40. The Parable of the Lost Son. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms round him and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'"
Thank you. Why don't we invite our second speaker up, Mark?
Hi, Mark. How are you doing? You okay?
Good, thanks, yeah.
Mark, for those of us who were here last night, we found out that you are a chaplain at Whitehall, and also that you've written some books about Christianity and you give talks like this. Have you always been based in the southeast?
No, is this on? I'll use this. For some of the years of my childhood, I grew up in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and then for a few years, from 2001 to 2005, I was living and working with my family in Uganda in East Africa, living in Kampala.
What sort of stuff were you up to?
So I was teaching theology in a small theological college, a Bible school in the center of Kampala, and we were training church ministers from the whole region. Actually, we had quite a lot of refugees from places like Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, as well as Ugandan students I was teaching.
Amazing. Well, Mark, over to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Shall I use this one or this? That one? Good. Well, I'd love it if you could keep that passage that was just read open, because that'll be the basis of what I want to think about. We're looking at 5 different short stories from Jesus' short story collection, one each night, and this sometimes called the parable of the prodigal son, the lost son, as it says here. But I want to start by talking about a man called William Hogarth. I don't know whether some of you have come across him. He was an 18th century genius. He was an artist, a great artist, but he was particularly renowned for being a satirist and a social critic. He held up a mirror to the hypocrisies and corruption of British society in his day. There was no whitewash. There was no place to hide. His paintings depicted life, warts and all. And his most famous work is called A Rake's Progress. It's been a very influential work. It was basically, it was formed of 8 individual paintings that were then turned into etchings, and they basically went the 18th century version of going viral. They became incredibly powerful and have had a profound impact on British culture and other cultures since. The film director Alan Parker, some of you may have seen some of his movies, he called them a sort of prototype of cinematic storyboarding, telling a story through 8 individual pictures. And the focus is of a young man called Tom Rakewell. And he inherits huge wealth from his father, who'd been a miser. And in the sequence of these paintings, he starts out with all this lavish wealth. He's the talk of the town. He becomes, gets right to the top of the A-list. He's the kind of person that everyone wants to be around. But over the subsequent years, he fritters it all away on wild living, on drink, on gambling, on orgies, the whole lot. And then he has various close escapes with people that he's in debt to. And then finally, he ends up being taken to a debtor's prison, but that's not the end, because his end point is in Bedlam, the infamous Bethlehem hospital, where those who were mentally ill, those who were deemed by society then as insane, ended up. And the last picture has him there. Now, he had it coming to him. He was clearly a rogue. And in the course of the pictures, we see, he treats people terribly, including the one person, the woman who loved him and sticks with him right to the end, but he treats her terribly. And we see this story, and we look, and it's hard to avoid the conclusion that basically he got what he deserved in the end. He gets sucked in deeper and deeper, and he loses everything. I guess a modern equivalent might be Walter White in Breaking Bad. It starts out with a few pretty bad decisions, but they're not very big, but it sort of escalates, doesn't it? And it leads to worse and worse things with an accumulative effect of devastation. What happens when people screw up? What happens when it all goes wrong? I think our era is incredibly judgmental about people who mess up, don't you think? And there's no mercy. Even for those who fess up and apologize. In fact, these days, even associating with people who have messed up, that can get you thrown out. And if you don't believe me, just read the tabloids, or even worse, just read Twitter. Twitter storms basically just pounce on people, just for saying one wrong thing, perhaps. And we assume that that reveals a whole sort of dearth of other things. Lock them up, throw away the key, just like Tom Rakewell. Now, I'm pretty sure that when Hogarth made these paintings, he knew this section from Jesus' storybook. He knew the prodigal son. And people still sort of vaguely have an awareness of this story even today in our sort of secular world. But actually, the prodigal son, or even the lost son, I think that's probably the wrong title, because actually it's about a man with 2 sons, and we're going to think about each of them. If anything, I think it should probably be called the prodigal father, because actually the point of this parable, the point of this short story, is to think about the father and what he's like and how he treats somebody who has really screwed up. And the thing is, Jesus seems to be telling us this story because it reveals something about God and what God thinks of those who mess up. And so we think, first of all, about the younger son. I've called it messing up the Tom Rakewell way. And it has, I guess, the kind of makings of a Hollywood movie, doesn't it? And sometimes there's satisfaction at a riches to rags story, especially if we sense, well, he had it coming to him. He deserved it. And there is no doubt in this story, I wonder if you picked it up as it was read, there is no doubt that this guy behaves outrageously. Verse 12, the little number 12 there, you see, he goes up to his dad and he quietly requests his inheritance in advance. He's not simply inquiring, how much I'm going to get. No, he wants his share now. What does that suggest? Well, for him, his priority is the cash, not a relationship with dad. Normally, you get an inheritance after somebody dies. He wants the money now, but to all intents and purposes, it's as if he wished dad was dead now. More remarkable, though, is that his father accedes to his wishes. He gives him what he asked for. The father divides the property, and no sooner has he done this than the kid is off. Whatever money can buy, he buys. Whatever looks fun, he indulges in. It is some people's idea of heaven, isn't it? Total freedom to do whatever I want, whenever I want, in whatever way I want. Isn't that why some people enter the national lottery? Just think of what I could do with all that cash. But inevitably, his resources don't last forever. In verse 14, he shows that his pockets empty with terrible timing, just as a famine is beginning. Those so-called friends that he'd had when he was on the A-list, well, they have completely evaporated like the morning mist. They've got their own problems, of course. I mean, there's a famine. They're certainly not going to help this guy. And just to show how rock bottom things have become, Jesus describes him in the very last place you would ever expect to find one of his fellow Jews: a pigsty. He was so desperate that he even contemplates eating the pig's food. You can see that in verse 15. Things are bad. And to all intents and purposes, here was a rich man's son who has become a slave. You cannot get more sort of riches to rags than that, can you? It's tragic. But I don't know about you, but I can't help feeling that he had it coming to him. I mean, he asked for it, didn't he? Just think of the heartbreak he caused his father. Put yourself in that pigsty. What would you do? Well, the turning point comes there in number 17. Do you see that? He came to his senses. He started thinking. He realizes what a total moron he's been. Now, you could be cynical, I suppose. He could be thinking, well, at least I get fed at home. Do you see what he says? Verse 18, I will set out, go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. A cynic would say, well, he's just wanting to get food. Well, fair enough. But the fact is, he turns back. Who cares why? He's going home. That in itself proves that he is swallowing his pride. He's admitting that he got it wrong. His words are revealing. His behavior, though, you see, is not just a human offense. He says, I've offended God. Just like Shane was saying, he hates what he's become. Because you see, apart from anything else, God's law says that, well, we should honor our parents. He's not really done that. He'd rather his dad was dead. Now, why does Jesus tell such a depressing story? Well, he's not done yet. He's painting a picture of how people actually treat God. It's about people who make a break for freedom from God while enjoying all the benefits that the world God created has to offer. This sort of person, would never be seen dead at a Christian event like this one. It's all about self-gratification, getting what I want. I want to live my life. It's my life. In my world. How I want, when I want. Except, it's not my world, is it? It's God's. So if we've got Jesus right here, what happens next makes crucial reading. I hope you're on the edge of your seats with this. You see, how will the father react? That matters for people who screw up. Let's take up the story from verse 20. So he got up, went to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father stopped him, said to his servants, "Quick, get the best clothes out and the best food. What better excuse for a party could there be? My boy's back. I thought he was dead, but he's alive. My boy is home." It's wonderful, isn't it? But we missed the shock, I think. After everything the son has done, the father was perfectly within his rights to disown his son. But not only that, senior Middle Eastern men never ran. That was far beneath their dignity. But we can picture this old man every morning and evening scanning the horizon just to see if his boy is coming home. After weeks of nothing, at last he sees the emaciated silhouette on the horizon. And so he runs. He can't contain his excitement. But do you notice how he wouldn't even let his son finish the prepared speech? He's hugging and welcoming him. He's getting the party rolling. This son who had become a slave is welcomed back as a son with open arms. He wasn't worthy of that, of course. He didn't deserve that. But because of his father's love, home is where he belonged. Just imagine the taste of Mum's cooking. I mean, he'd had the most amazing lifestyle. I guess he could eat all the money all the food that money could buy, but nothing must have tasted as good as that meal that night. The father was financially worse off, but relationally rich. His boy is home, and that mattered more than anything. And that is God. Please erase those sort of negative images, the cosmic policeman with a sort of truncheon sitting there on his cloud, just waiting for us all to trip up. Or some sort of celestial ogre who's constantly making demands on us. Is that what God is like to you? You see, people have kicked God in the teeth, lived in his world independently of him. That's what the Bible calls sin. And yet he's still this God. He's desperate for us back. He's desperate for it. And he will do what Jesus' story here lacks the space to tell us. Jesus will teach about it elsewhere. But, God, this Father God, sends his own son, the storyteller Jesus, to die on a cross, to pave the way back to friendship with him, to bring forgiveness with unconditional love. It means no one is too far gone. No one is too far gone for God, whether it's the sex worker or the sex worker's clients, whether it's the terrorist or the swindler, the drug pusher or the user, whether it's the abused or the one abusing. It doesn't matter. All are welcome. The only requirement, to come to your senses, to do an about turn, to return to the God who made us. Because, truth be told, the world will never offer the total fulfillment or satisfaction we crave. It just won't do it without our Creator at its center. It's about living according to the Maker's instructions. That's the best way to live. kicks and thrills will always evaporate in the cold light of day. So not only, you see, is sin, is living in God's world without God a kick in his teeth, it's also futile. It never delivers on what it promises. I'll never forget something that Jack Higgins, a very successful novelist, he writes other novels under the name Harry Patterson. He's still alive, but he once said this. He was asked, what he wished he'd known as a teenager starting out in life. He's now in his late 80s. His answer was very succinct. He said, when you get to the top, there's nothing there. And when people come to their senses, they're far more likely to swallow their pride, to turn back, to do what Shane did and pray, to journey home to God, saying sorry, facing reality. But Jesus' story doesn't stop there, because if we expected him to side with the religious types, we got another thing coming. Because you see, there is another way of messing up. Not the Tom Rakewell way, but the Holy Joe way. The older son, you see, is also quite a key character in this short story. And he cannot handle it. He emphatically did not share the joy. In fact, his father's joy made him more livid. You see in verse 28, he refuses to join the party. He's not going in. And I can understand that, can't you? His younger brother deserved his pigsty. He should still be there by rights. Even worse, half the family fortune has gone forever, isn't it? Frittered away on prostitutes and booze. What a waste. If that is the case, well, we might sympathize, but that's not his argument. Verse 29, have a look at that. Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, it's an interesting way of putting it, isn't it? This son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, you can hear him sputtering, can't you? When he comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. Stinks. I wonder if you detect a bit of old-fashioned jealousy there, though. Did a part of him envy the good times? Since it turns out, you see, he's just as keen to get his hands on the cash. It's just that he's a little bit more patient. He's the dutiful son, yes, but he's doing it to ensure he gets the inheritance later, at the proper time. You see, he's no more interested in a relationship with his dad than his brother was. But you'd never know it to look at him. He does all the right things. He's very perfect and dutiful, no less. You know, while the dad is scanning the horizon for his younger son, what's the older one doing? He's slogging away on the farm, because that's all it is, duty. No love for his father, no love for his brother. That's clear in verse 29. He feels just like a slave at home, obeying orders. I guess he assumed that that's what was needed to get the inheritance. It never occurred to him that his dad might want to give it to him because he loved him. But his brother, well, his younger brother, he doesn't even lift a finger, and he gets it all in advance. I have to say that in many ways I was that older brother. I was the sort of person who might turn up at church thinking that I was doing God a favor. I like to be seen doing the right things. But that never meant for 1 minute I was interested in a relationship with God. I just wanted what he could give me on my terms. I just did my sin in a different way. I lived independently, but I did it respectably. That anybody else could live the life of Riley and then just saunter into a friendship with God, well, that frankly is appalling. I couldn't bear the thought. But you see, here's the point of Christianity. Here's the point of Jesus' short story. The only way for a relationship with God is through Jesus. It's not by being good. It's not by going to church or even being religious. It's through Jesus dying on a cross for us, a death that brings forgiveness, and will only accept his free, undeserved gift of heaven if we are prepared to swallow our pride, admit our responsibility, come to our senses, and give up our independence from our Creator. But here is what makes the Christian message extraordinary. Because you see, it means nobody, and I mean nobody, is barred. Even the worst sinner, however you choose to define that, even the worst sinner is welcome. God is surprisingly non-discriminatory. Religious behavior can never help you notch up brownie points with God. We'll think about that a bit more tomorrow night in the short story we look then. But if we don't like this, then we'll naturally sympathize with the older brother, which is precisely what Jesus wants to expose in this story. Jesus has been facing tough opposition from religious leaders. We can see, if you wanted to read more, at the beginning of this chapter. But actually, you see, they don't like what he's doing and the crowd that he's hanging out with. And they're respectable, yes, they're religious, sure, but they themselves are in reality far from God. You see, they're more interested in looking right for God than in being right with God. But there's a final thing to notice. Did you pick up how the dad deals with his older son? How incredibly gracious and careful he is with him as well. He comes out of the party to get him. He wants him there. He's part of the family. He's no slave driver. And the boy's always had the opportunity to enjoy living at home with his dad. And that's the most important thing, isn't it? Well, Jesus never tells us what happens to the older brother. It's just left hanging. Jesus has a habit of doing this with a number of his stories. He doesn't end them. It's almost like the door to the party is left open, and will he? Won't he? Will you? Won't you? The Tom or Tina Rakewill, the wild living pagan rebel, or the holy Joe or Josephine, the respectable religious rebel. As Shane was sharing, we're all in the same boat. We're all one or the other, but the end result is the same. We live in God's world as if it was ours. But the amazing thing is, Jesus is not fussy. He doesn't discriminate. He doesn't sort of set you apart. The crucial thing is he wants you back, even after we've kicked him in the teeth. There's a famous story of a South American mother whose daughter has left home for the big city. We all know what sorts of things could happen then. Months pass. She hears nothing about her girl. She's racked with fear and anxiety. She knows the ways of the world. She knows what goes on, as any mum would. Eventually, she can bear it no longer. She saves up to travel to the big city, and she spends what little she has left on making thousands of copies of her precious girl's photograph. And these she distributes in bars, in brothels, in sweatshops, all over the city. And when she runs out of those, she goes home. One day, some weeks later, her daughter entered a bar and just suddenly saw her own photograph on the sort of notice board. She takes it down and on the back finds these photocopied words. Wherever you are, whatever you've done, come home. And she wept. and went home. That is the offer that God makes to every single one of us. It's an offer acceptable only to those who accept they're also rebels, who live in God's world as if it was ours. It applies to those who, as much to those who have spent their lives doing religious things as it does to those who haven't even darkened the doors of anything remotely religious. You see, when Jesus died on that cross, it was as if he was saying to the world, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you've done, come home. Come home. That is the message of Christianity. Thank you very much for listening.